If you're just getting into PC gaming or wanting to upgrade to something that supports higher resolutions and fast-paced gaming, then this is one for you. 1440p is the new sweet spot standard for gaming, so we've put together a set of components that will give you the very best performance without breaking the bank. But before we get into that, here's a quick word from this video's sponsor. My PC's almost ready, I just need to get a cooler, but I'm kind of a bit low on cash now. What am I going to do? The Liquid Freezer 3 from Arctic. It's available in up to 420ml, and you can have it with or without RGB, and it comes with a 6-year warranty. And it's cheaper than all other AIOs on the market.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, isn't it?
Hold on a minute. The Arctic Liquid Freezer 3. Find out more by clicking the link in the description below. Now, when it comes to 1440p gaming, you have some choices in terms of graphics cards, starting with whether you go with AMD or Nvidia. And even then, which model do you go for? And then the same could be said for the CPU. Do you go with AMD or do you go with Intel? And then again, which model do you go for? It can all be a bit of a minefield, but don't worry, because today we're going to be going through all of the parts that will build the very best 1440p gaming PC you can buy right now, all while looking extremely unique and stylish. Because what's the point if your PC does the business, but doesn't look the business? So starting with the CPU, and it's probably no surprise that we're going with the AMD Ryzen 7 7800X3D. While Intel has the likes of the Core i5-14600K, the 7800X3D just makes more sense, even given its slightly higher price tag. With 8 cores, 16 threads and a boost clock of 5GHz, it already sounds pretty impressive, but the big thing that the 7800X3D brings to the table is that whopping 96MB of L3 3D cache that can lead to some really hefty boost in performance in games, which, if we're going for the very best 1440p performance, I couldn't think of anything better for the money. For the motherboard, we wanted to stay conservative and not spec up something ludicrously expensive that gives us a ton of features that we're just not going to need, which led me straight to B650 over X670, and I settled on the Asus TUF Gaming B650M+. Being a TUF board, you know you're getting solid components from the 12+2 power stages for clean power delivery, PCI Express 5.0 for storage if needed, 2.5G Ethernet, and plenty of USB ports including Type-C 3.2 Gen 2x2. And it even has some nifty features to make installation even easier, like the M.2 QLatch system for your storage. Now, speaking of storage, obviously your budget will dictate what you end up going for, but I've gone with the Apacer AS2280Q4L 1TB Gen 4 NVMe drive. While Gen 5 is the next big thing, for the average gamer, it's just not going to make a huge difference unless you're playing games that can harness direct storage technology like Ratchet & Clank and a few others, though in all honesty, the list is pretty small and, well, pretty dire. So with that in mind, Gen 4 is fine for our needs, and with 2 more M.2 slots and 4 SATA ports on the motherboard, there's no issue if you wanted to add more storage at a later date. But for now, 1TB should still be enough for Windows and Call of Duty. Memory-wise, with the CPU we've chosen, of course we're going for a 6000MHz CL30 kit to really harness the true potential of the 7800X3D and to give the very best performance possible, all while not breaking the bank, as the cost of memory is actually working its way down as of late, so you can actually get better performing memory for a much more reasonable price now. And being that this is AMD and the sweet spot is 6000MHz CL30, there's just no sense spending more, as the benefits above this just aren't there like they are with Intel. That's why we've gone with the Corsair Vengeance RGB DDR5 6000MHz CL30 kit, which should give us some nice added RGB along with the performance that we need. For the GPU, which is arguably the most important part of a gaming PC, we've gone with the Inno3D RTX 4070 Ti Super Twin X2. Being an RTX 4070 Ti Super means that you're getting the latest technologies from Nvidia such as ray tracing, DLSS upscaling with frame generation, RTX Remix and much more. And being from Inno3D, you know it's going to run cool and quiet at the same time. It's also a pretty small and understated graphics card, so it's going to look great inside the system whilst also not generating too much heat. Perfect. Cooler wise, we're going with the Thermaltake Tough Liquid Ultra 360, which as the name suggests is a 360ml all-in-one liquid cooler, which also features a screen on top of the CPU block for that added flair for monitoring your system or playing around and putting GIFs on it for that extra level of personalisation. While the included fans aren't RGB with this particular model, don't worry as I've got a plan for that which we'll talk about in a little bit. PSU wise, we don't need to go too overkill, we just need something that will give us enough power for our components, while also being stable. And that's where the Thermaltake Tough Power GF3 ARGB 850 watt comes in. Being 850 watt, it's more than enough for the components we're going with, along with giving us some extra headroom for upgrading at a later date if we wanted to. It's also ATX 3.0 compliant, 80 plus gold rated, and comes with a 12VH PWR Gen 5 connector as standard, which means we don't need to use an unsightly adapter to connect our GPU to it, further perfecting the aesthetics of the build. And as the name suggests, yes, it has RGB. So what about the case? Well, that's where this gets really interesting. We wanted the build to be a bit of a showcase and wanted it to be unique and to show off the rest of the components in a special way, which is where the Tower 300 from Thermaltake comes in. It's unique in the fact that it can be mounted vertically or horizontally, while also giving a clear fish tank type view to the components inside without sacrificing on performance, as it can house up to a 420mm radiator on the side, and also has support for the longest graphics cards on the market due to the way that they're mounted. For those who are new to building PCs, it's also extremely versatile in how almost every panel can be removed, allowing you full access to every part of the case, making building your system an absolute breeze. Now in terms of fans, I did mention this earlier, because the cooler we're using doesn't have RGB fans on it, we're actually going to replace them with some Tough Fan 12 RGB fans to give a bit of colour to the build, and to provide quiet operation while also pushing a lot of airflow. Now obviously if you were building this yourself and you wanted RGB, I'd advise getting an AIO like the TH360 V2 Ultra, which comes with RGB as standard, but I'm using what I had available to me right now and just kind of making my own one up through the use of the fans and the AIO. Okay, so let's get started by building, I guess, as much of the PC outside of the case as we physically can, because, well, it just doesn't make any sense trying to get your hands in there, even though the case we're using is very open, and you will see exactly what I'm talking about with that. So let's start with the motherboard and try and basically build up as much of a PC as we can on the motherboard on the desk. Now, when it comes to actually doing this part, some people, want to do it on a mat, some people have the little wristbands and things like that. Never had a need for it. Always just built them on top of the box like this and never had a problem. So this is a board, Micro ATX. We've also got our processor here, the 7800X3D. Now, when I'm building a PC, it's very, very easy and tempting to just kind of throw stuff here, there and everywhere, but kind of fall into that trap. So I want to make sure that I'm kind of putting stuff away as I do it, because otherwise we just end up with parts kind of here, there and everywhere. So we've got the 7800X3D, which, as mentioned, is all about the 3D V-cache. Now, on the chip itself, there is this kind of little arrow. Now, that corresponds to where we're actually going to be putting it inside the socket. So I'm going to kind of keep this nice and simple for people who have maybe never built a PC before. So you want to push the arm out, lift that up, lift this bit up, and you will see that there is a little arrow on there, which corresponds to where you want to put the processor. Now, you can't really get it wrong because there are little notches on there, so it's as simple as that. Place it in, push this down. You can take this cap off, but I just prefer doing that because it flings off and I don't know, it's just a little bit funny. So that's that off. We can now move on to the SSD, which is where the handy dandy eTeknix PC maintenance toolkit comes in. This has got everything you need to build, repair and maintain your PC. Now, everything you see in here is what you get, barring the speaker, which I put in there just for troubleshooting, the thermal paste that we are going to need as well, and the handy dandy eTeknix Velcro cable ties, which this and the toolkit are all available over on store.eteknix.com. So we've got our PH2 head on there. We're not going to need that because we actually need something a little bit smaller. So in here, we're going to go for the PH00, and then we can take off this top heatsink. Now, we are using a Gen 4 drive, but if you were using Gen 5, then this is kind of the slot you wanted to go for anyway, because it's the one that communicates directly with the CPU. Now, in terms of the SSD, we've got this one from Apacer. 1TB is more than enough for the average gamer. You're going to get Windows on there, you're going to get Call of Duty on there, and that's about it. But in all seriousness, if you're not running Call of Duty, then 1TB is going to be more than enough anyway. So let's get that out, put this back in, try and stay organized with what we're doing. And with this, just like the CPU, there's only one way that you can actually put it in. It has got a little notch on there, so that corresponds to the notch on here. Now, I did also mention that this board does have kind of easy DIY features. So it's got this little Q latch, I think it's called Q latch, M.2 latch, and you just turn it around like that, no screwing necessary. So kind of makes the whole PC maintenance toolkit bit redundant until you want to put the heatsink back on, which we're gonna peel off this protective film off of here. And once we've taken that off, we can install this back into place. So just screw that down like so, and the other side. If I can line it up like so, screw that side down and then tighten up the other side. And yeah, we're kind of halfway there to having a fully functional PC, barring a cooler, obviously. Now, last thing that we can actually do on the motherboard before we do put it into the case is get our memory. So we've got 6,000 megahertz. It is Corsair, which I'm sure, you know, the rest of the build is Thermaltake based, but I didn't have any Thermaltake memory that was the right speed and the cache latency that I wanted to go for. So I'm sure Thermaltake aren't going to be too happy about me using Corsair, but this isn't a sponsored video, so it is what it is. We're just using a lot of Thermaltake parts because I always like to try and fulfill that ecosystem. Hence why we've got Thermaltake power supply, case, and obviously the cooler as well, and the fans. Now with this, again, there is a little notch. You can't really get it wrong, so it only goes in one way. Line it up in slots 2 and 4, and then push it down into place. And once we've done that, you could, in theory, put a cooler on this, boot it up, and away you go. But obviously there's still a lot more to do in terms of getting it in the case. So let's get the case up here and yeah, actually start stripping it down and get this whole system inside. So in terms of the case, the thing that I love about this is my first time actually really looking at the Tower 300, but compared to the other Tower cases that we've looked at, everything is essentially, for the most part, toolless. So the top bit just comes off like that. The front bit is on a little push system. That comes off. The side panels, which are interchangeable, they just pull off. So if you wanted the black strip sort of on the inside, you could do that. I think it would look a little bit odd, but still, they just pull off very, very easily. Even the side panels, we can just push them. They come off. Other side panel, which is where the radiator for the AIO would go, comes off. And then even the back panel, if I turn this round, you can see again, no screws, just literally pulls off. And the beauty of that is, not only is it very, very easy, we've essentially stripped down the whole PC quite easily. You can get to kind of every part of it, which is probably the nicest part if you're maybe new to PC building. You can just get to here, you can get to there, you can get to the back. Everything is nice and simple, and that is what PC building should be. It shouldn't be complicated. Now, this does come with some fans in the top. We're probably going to end up maybe looking at changing them to RGB ones. I'll see if I've actually got any for there. But the fans that we have got are for the AIO, which is going to go on the inside. But the first thing we need to do is actually get the motherboard inside here. But before I do that, because I want to make this a bit of a showpiece, I don't want to have this vertical. I actually want it sort of horizontal, and we have got a stand for it, which looks really, really cool. So it will kind of be sitting like that. So what I need to do is actually unscrew the feet, and we've got another panel that goes on there. So turn it on its side, taking this dust filter out because we're not actually going to be using this because the extra panel we've got, which is this one, looks remarkably similar to the top one, actually has its own dust filter built into it. So what we have to do using the screwdriver is actually take the feet off of this. And I like this, it kind of gives you that modularity, that, I guess, extra sense of customization. You know, it's not a huge sort of modification or anything like that by any means, but it just allows you to kind of have things a little bit different. So yeah, just one screw at the top, one screw at the bottom on each foot, so left and right sides, and then the feet come off nice and easily. Once they're off, put that down, we can then take the panel, and by the looks of it, I'm going to say it goes that way, and then it just pushes on. No screws necessary. So at least that part of it is toolless. Now, we can look at getting the motherboard into place. So if we take our motherboard, and this actually sits at a slightly different kind of angle, I guess you could call it, because of the way that the board and everything is inverted on here. So if we move that into place, it's got one of the little screws in the middle as well, which makes life so much easier when you're looking to kind of, you know, get everything lined up, especially if you haven't got it laid down. You can actually do it vertically and it just kind of holds the motherboard in place. Then we can get some screws and screw this into place. So with everything screwed down, motherboard's in place, we can put this off to one side just temporarily while we get our AIO, which is, as mentioned earlier, the Tough Liquid Ultra 360. So we're not actually going to be using the fans on this. We are going to be using RGB because RGB makes everything better. If I was speccing up this build from scratch and I was buying the parts, then yeah, I would go for obviously one of these models that has RGB built into it. But this one is the one that I had available in our stock room, and I had the fans, so it just made sense to amalgamate them together and basically do that. So we are using AMD, which does straight away tell me that I need to change the bracket on this. Don't need these two bags, don't need the fans. I'm going to need everything in there. Other than that, I'm done with this box. So I can put that off to one side. Don't need the manual because I've done this many, many times before. Professional, obviously. So what we need is the AMD bracket, which for some reason is covered in thermal paste because someone didn't clean it up from the last time. But on here, we've got the Intel bracket, which I'm pretty sure comes installed as standard. This can just push off like so. And then we can take our AMD bracket and put that into place like so, and it clicks in, and then that's going to house the thumb screws and the little lugs, because if you remember, on the motherboard it actually has two little lugs on the retention bracket. So depending on the cooler that you're actually going with, there will be different things, and depending on the platform as well. So if you are going with Intel, for instance, you are going to have to use a backplate of some kind like this. But if you are going with AMD, typically speaking, it does use the existing lugs, but that's not always the case. So definitely check the user manual as to what you actually need to do with it. But if we get that one on there, screw that down. You don't want to tighten it all the way because you do still want some kind of leverage. Then we're good to go with that. Now, we can talk about the fans. If I can get that off to one side, we can move all this out of the way. We have some cables and everything that we do need to connect up, but we need our fans, which are the Tough Fan 12 RGB. Now, I would have maybe liked to have used the SWA fans, purely because they have the reversible blades, and especially with the case that we're using, we could have had one on the bottom kind of pushing up. If I did it with this, while you still would get the RGB on the outside, I'm not too sure. So we'll play about with that idea as we kind of do it and everything. Now, in terms of orientation, this is another thing you want to think about. We're going to have it on the case like that, and then this is going to go on the motherboard. So if we were to have the fans on the inside, again, you'd be seeing the back of them, which doesn't look great. So I think maybe the best orientation, if the case allows it, is going to be to put it on the front like that, so you get kind of the full view of the main hub of the fan, the RGB and everything. So yeah, let's have a little look at the case and see if that's actually an option. So I just had a quick look at the case, and the beauty is even more of it actually comes apart. So we have got the bracket here for radiators, so that's going to sit over the front like that. We're going to be able to put the fans in. The lights are going to be kind of shining on the outside. I'm hoping it looks good. It's always tricky with cases, trying to get obviously orientation right and trying to get kind of, you know, the best aesthetics and stuff as well. So if we put the fans on here, I would have liked to have had them on the inside, but I'm not sure on if that side would look kind of the best. Yeah, so I'm gonna go with this, but we may change it as the build kind of progresses. So if we line all these up onto here, get our bracket and lay that over the top. We have just done a little test fit, so we know that it all fits swimmingly. And then we can screw this in, line it up with the holes, and get the first screw in. So first one in is going to be a total of 12 screws, 4 per fan. Get the one down there in, and again line things up. Screw it in, and then in theory everything else should kind of line up pretty well anyway. But I always like to go kind of in diagonals, just to make sure that you're not having any issues with alignment and things like that. There you go, that one's gone straight in. And then we can just finish the rest of the screws and get them all installed. So now that we have our fans and our radiator installed on the bracket, it's just a matter of sliding it into the side of the case. So move the block over to there, and we do have to be quite mindful because obviously the fans have cables on there. So we just need to make sure that the cables are not getting in the way. We could unravel them, but we should be okay. Just propping them up like that. And then making sure that one's not in the way. Moving it in. And there's two little kind of notches that need to go in at the bottom. And that allows us to slide that in like that, and then we can screw this back into place. And then the radiator is in place. We just need to then take the cables, which are coming through here, and put them through the holes. But I am very mindful of the 4-pin and the 8-pin EPS connectors because they are very, very close now to the radiator. So we might actually look at doing that next, get all the front panel headers and everything in, and then we can get the cooler block on, and then we can start looking at other sort of major components of the build. So off camera, we actually decided we do want the fans on the inside. It just kind of looked like there wouldn't be too much going on the inside in terms of that all-important RGB. So we did switch them around. It does mean that obviously you're seeing the back of the fans, but the beauty of these fans is that they have got RGB on the front and the back, so you're still going to get a lot of that light. Like I said, I would have maybe preferred to have something that had reverse fan blades on this. You'd still get the RGB, but it would be the front of the hub as opposed to the back of the fans, but it is what it is. So let's get the block actually on. So thermal paste on top of our 7800 X3D on there. And I know I'm going to get flamed in the comments for, oh, you didn't use this method, you didn't use that method. I've used this for many, many years and I just like it. So now we've got to sort of see which way round we're actually going to have the block itself. So we just need to make sure that our fixtures are round the right way, and then we can get that into place. So just going to jiggle this one round. It's going to sit round like that. We can screw that down, and then really it's just kind of a matter of seeing which way you want to, I guess, have things, because of obviously you have got restrictions with the hoses and things like that. We want to try and make this build look, I guess, as clean as physically possible without sort of the hoses having a kink in it or something like that. So if we would go like that, you can see that the hoses are sort of already starting to kink. So maybe it might make more sense if we can potentially go around this way, and then we can sort of manipulate the hoses to how we want. So if we slot them on, put that bit down into there, and then we can screw this down. Now these have got little springs on the actual screws, so you can't really over tighten them, but AMD can be a little finicky with clamping pressure and stuff like that. So I'm going to tighten it all the way down and then just sort of go back about a half a turn. We have got the cable in the top, which the cable that comes with this AIO actually has 2 micro USBs on there. So if you have got another Thermaltake device, you can do 2 devices into one header, and this is just going to go straight onto the motherboard. And we'll sort out all the cable management in a little bit. And like I say, we can sort out the hoses and kind of what's happening with them as well. Now, power supply wise, if we move the case off to one side, we have actually realized we've got quite a bit of room when it comes to the EPS connectors, so we don't need to worry kind of too much. Power supply wise, obviously it's got RGB, it's the GF3A RGB, so really happy with this. You're probably not going to see too much of the RGB because of where it's actually going to be in the system, but again, it was what I had available, 850 watt, so should work out very, very nicely. So we've got the unit itself and the cables, put that back in there. And this has also got the PCI Express 5.0 connector, which means cable management is just going to look a little bit nicer, I think. We don't need a power plug because we have one. We're going to need our 24-pin, which is this one here. And these are flat cables as well, so again, they're going to look very, very nice. The only one that's not a flat cable is this one here, which is the PCI Express. Now on this particular power supply, even though it does have a 12V PWR, it is a 450 watt, not a 600 watt. So if you are looking at maybe running a 4090, you're gonna wanna go for maybe one of the newer models, which is the GF, I think it's the GF3A series, if I remember rightly. So that's kind of going to be what you want to go for, just so you've got ATX 3.1 certification, if I remember right, and it's got the 600 watt connector. But for the card that we're going to be putting in, which is 4070 Ti Super, 450 watts is more than enough. Now we haven't got any SATA devices in here, so we don't need to worry about SATA cables. We don't need PCI Express, don't need SATA, don't need SATA, don't need Molex, and we do need the EPS connectors, which is here. Now with this one, it has got a pigtail on there, so we've got the two 4+4, and then we've got another two 4+4. So we've got on this particular motherboard an 8-pin and then a 4-pin. So we're going to need that, and we're not going to need a floppy connector. So we don't actually need that many cables for this build. And then it's just a matter of plugging all of this in. So with the 24-pin, it's got two connectors, which go in there and there. We've got our 450 watt 12V PWR, which looks like it's reversible, so that makes things even easier. We can plug that directly into here, like so. And then we've got our CPU connector, which will go into here. And that is our power supply ready to go. So if we bring the case back over, we can actually get the power supply installed into it and get the cables plugged into the motherboard. Now there is actually one other cable that I did almost forget about. Luckily Brandon behind the camera told me about it, and that's the RGB sync cable. So it has got on the power supply itself this little RGB sync connector. So if we plug that into there, then comes out into this cable, which has our typical ARGB 5V 3-pin header, or for Gigabyte motherboards, it's got the other 3-pin connector. But other than that, we're kind of ready to go. So if we move these cables out of the way, we've got our fan cables, and this is actually something I really like about Thermaltake, the length of the cables they give you. You're not going to have any restrictions if you had, say, a slightly bigger case. Now, if we take this off, there's actually a bracket for the power supply. So we can remove that. We can then install the power supply onto this bracket, and then it just slides into place. Now you may remember that I spoke about the fact that this case has panels that just easily remove, and it's also the same on the front. We've got this one because this can actually be taken off and you can get a screen that goes on the front there, which is really, really cool. Has got its own little dust filter, but it is going to allow us to basically slide the power supply through and to pull the cables through at the same time. So if we get that there, grab all of the cables, move our fan cables over to one side, and then we can grab these cables through the front, and it's just, I don't know, it makes building a PC a lot easier when you have that kind of access to everything. So we can pull that through, and then if I turn the case around so you guys can see, we can pop the power supply up here and slide it through, and then again pull the cables through. We can then screw it down at the back, and then we can put the cables back through and kind of manipulate where we want them to go. Okay, because this video would be super duper long if we did actually do all of the cable management on screen, we decided to do it off screen. But yeah, we've got our HD audio, we've got USB, we've got fan connectors, USB Type-C, 3.1, everything is as it should be. And do you know what? I think we've actually done a pretty good job in terms of the cable management. Just don't look at the back. Now, when it comes to the graphics card, as mentioned earlier, we're going with this, which is the RTX 4070 Ti Super Twin X2 from Inno3D. And this is going to be perfect for 1440p gaming. You could even do 4K gaming if you wanted to potentially go up to 4K. You've got to remember, with this being an RTX 40 series card, we have got the ability to utilize the likes of DLSS with frame generation. Because we've got the connector, we don't need this little adapter. We just need the card itself, which I think is actually going to tie in really, really well with the system. It's not got tons of RGB or anything like that on it. It is a lot more I guess, understated when you think about it, but I think it actually works with the kind of look of the case and the fact that the case does look quite industrious. So let's take all the caps off, because we don't actually know whether we're going to use DisplayPort or HDMI, and sometimes when you're installing the graphics card, these just get in the way in terms of the expansion bracket. Now, looking at it, if we actually line it up to where it's got to go, it does look like we've actually got a little bit of room down here, because this isn't the longest graphics card in the world. And the beauty of that is with this case, you actually get this little bracket, which I will show you in a minute as well. So if we put this onto its side, we can look to get the graphics card installed, which is going to go in slots 1 and 2. So if we unscrew this one, take out the ventilated bracket, take out the second one, and again take out the ventilated bracket. We can then look to get the graphics card lined up and into place, and then realize it's actually slots 2 and 3. So we'll take out the third one, screw that in, and this is why, boys and girls, you should always check these things and don't do like I did, because it just wastes a little bit of time, but it is what it is. Who knows, maybe we'll edit it out, but probably not, because now I've actually spoke about it for quite some time. So let's get that bracket back in, graphics card lined up with the top PCI Express slot into place, and then we can screw this back down. So first screw in, and the second one. So as I say, being an RTX 4070 Ti Super, we're going to get some really, really good performance. We're going to have the ability to enable ray tracing pretty much to the max at 1440, and then we've got DLSS 3, so we have got frame generation and stuff as well. Graphics cards in, obviously we have got our 12VH PWR, but if I turn this up that way, we should, in theory, be able to put that down like that. This should slot in like that. Then we can run our cable through here and into here, take the slack off, and it actually hides some of our cable management mess that we've got sort of underneath this fan grill. Now obviously if you were to put a fan in there, then you haven't really got to worry about it, because it's going to hide everything, but that actually hides things a lot better and allows us to kind of just push them off to the side, because it's held in and covered by this bracket. You have also got a hole at the back, so depending on the graphics card that you've got and sort of where the connector is, you might actually want to put it through that back connector, which if we have a little look, so then we can take it up there and put it into there, clip it back in and pull it down, and to be fair, that probably actually looks a little bit cleaner depending on what your needs are. So that is the build basically done. So I'm going to put all the side panels back on, starting with the rear panel, which again, with my wonderful job of cable management, if I hide everything out the way, we can just push that back onto place. We've then got side panels, which we've got 1 and 2, and all these panels are actually interchangeable as well. So if we put that one on, magnetic, this one on, magnetic, then we've got our glass panels. So first one will go on there and push on. Next one over this side and push on. And then we have our last panel, which is going to go on the front, which is the clip system one. So if we line that up, push that in like that, and then away we go. Now, there is one more thing before I actually even try and turn this on, and that is the bracket. Because as I say, you can have this vertically like this, or you could have it horizontally. So my glamorous assistant is going to basically go and get the bracket for me, and then we can see exactly how this is going to look. So pushing that to one side. This is the bracket. It is sold separately, but does allow you to put the system, if I put the top panel back on, like so, it does allow you very carefully to put the system like that, which, I mean, that is pretty unique in its own right. But now comes the moment of truth, which if we just move this over ever so slightly so we can plug the cable in, and then we can see if it boots up. And of course, with these builds, never had any doubt. Of course, it was always going to boot up. And the beauty is as well, on the screen, on the AIO, if we take this off, because that way you can actually get a better view of it, the screen actually rotates. So we can put that the way that we actually want it to be. Move the hoses a little bit. And there we have a fully fledged gaming build that looks a bit like an armory crate, like you'd get in sort of Apex or something like that. Push that back down. And there we go. So I think the next thing we really need to do is actually see how it performs in game. So yeah, bear with us, and we'll put it through the mill in a few titles to see exactly what kind of performance figures we get on this system. Okay, so starting things off with Alan Wake 2, and straight away we can see we're at 2560 by 1440. The render resolution is set to balance because we have got DLSS turned on, as well as frame generation. Now, when it comes to the settings, we have actually used the preset for high, which has for the most part put most of the settings on high. There's a few that are on sort of medium. This is really down to you as to the frame rate you get on your particular hardware, and if you want to sort of enable these for, I guess, a sacrifice of performance. As we scroll down, again, most things are on high. Now, we do also have our ray tracing preset, which we've also set to high, which is automatically enabled ray reconstruction, direct lighting, path tracing, which is set to high, and then transparency to high. So let's take a look at what kind of performance we're actually getting. If we just run around a little bit, straight away, I mean, you can see the reflections and everything on the floor. Look, I mean, the game looks visually stunning. Frame rate wise, at the moment, we're getting kind of 135. Lots of sort of volumetric lighting, clouds, puffs of smoke, you know, all that kind of stuff going on. But yeah, 135 frames per second. It will kind of peak up and it will sort of drop off a little bit. So currently at 140, if we carry on running around, 138, 142. Just sort of off camera, I was seeing frame rates of about 160 in places. We went up to 151 there, but it also did drop down to sort of about 126. So there's quite a lot of variance, I guess, in the game, depending on where you're looking, what you're doing, that kind of stuff. But yeah, 130 to 135 seems to be, I guess, the average frame rate that I'm getting. In terms of the temperatures, CPU package is sitting at a comfortable 58, 59 degrees, and then the GPU at 68 degrees. So everything is kept under control whilst we get those pretty high frame rates, which for a game like this, you don't need sort of 140, 150 frames per second. So you could, you know, turn them other settings from medium to high, and yeah, you shouldn't really notice too much of a drop off when it comes to the performance. So when we look at the settings in Cyberpunk, we are actually on the max setting. It is saying custom because we've turned frame generation on, but we've got ray reconstruction on, super resolution set to balanced, but we've actually got path tracing on as well, as you can see down here. So we are on the max settings for Cyberpunk, and just kind of standing here, we're getting 110 FPS. If we start running around, we can see it drops a little bit, but for the most part, it's hovering around 100 FPS. Graphics wise, looks absolutely amazing, as you'd expect in Cyberpunk with those settings on there. Lots of sort of light reflections and shadows, looking really, really nice. As we carry on running around, it will drop a little bit, probably close to sort of 100 FPS. As we go into kind of more intensive parts of the game, we're now at 98, 100. So yeah, looking really, really good, and still getting some amazing performance in game. As I say, this could change a little bit if you went into a more intensive area, but I'd like to think for the most part, you're going to be getting between sort of 85 to maybe even 110 FPS. Okay, so moving on to Hogwarts Legacy, and looking at the settings, we're at 2560 by 1440. The render resolution is a little bit lower because we have got DLSS enabled on balanced mode. We have got frame gen on as well. VSync is obviously turned off. And as we go into the settings, even though it says recommended, everything is actually on the ultra preset. ray tracing turned on in terms of reflections, shadows and ambient occlusion, and the ray tracing quality is set to ultra. So we're basically maxed out. And if we look at the game, it's snowing right now, but yeah, 150, 140 frames per second. Obviously it's going to drop the more that we kind of look out into the distance. 145, so pretty much between 130 and sort of 155. It's dropped a little bit here where it's a little bit busier, lots more people around. Obviously as I stand still, the frame rate goes up again, but we're also getting pretty decent temperatures. CPUs at 65 degrees, and then the GPUs at 62 degrees. So we're definitely getting good airflow from the build that we've done, and frame rates, as I say, pretty consistent now, sort of between 125 and 150 frames per second. For the most part though, it's sitting around 135 to 140 frames per second. So lastly, looking at Spider-Man, we're at 2560 by 1440. Upscaling wise, it is turned on with frame generation. The upscale method is DLSS super resolution, and we're set to balance mode. As we go into graphics, we've got very high turned on. We actually also want to turn ray tracing on because we want things to look as good as they physically can. We're going to set that to very high as well. And the cool thing is you can actually see things change as we do that. As we come out, away we go, wait for the frame rate to settle, but we're at 210, 207. It drops down a little bit. You can see the reflections. If I just go back here, the reflections on here due to the ray tracing look absolutely amazing as things reflect down from above. 200 frames per second. So really it's ranging anywhere between, I guess, around 190 to sort of 200 frames per second for the most part. And it is quite an intensive game as well. Lots of people, lots of things in the distance. If we sort of swing around a little bit, 220 frames per second, 205. So yeah, we're getting good frame rates. And again, temperatures are nice and under control. 64 degrees on the CPU and 65 degrees on the GPU. And come on, does that not look absolutely amazing with the reflections on the river there? Absolutely amazing game as well for anyone who hasn't played it. I definitely advise giving it a go. It does get a little bit repetitive, but in terms of the graphics, I think it looks, well, absolutely great. So performance-wise, I'm extremely happy with what we saw here today. With the games we chose, we did have the ability to harness DLSS and that all-important frame generation, which helped propel our frame rate even more. Looking at it, we could, as I mentioned, I guess if we wanted to, up things to 4K and still get some very respectable performance. So it's nice to know that we have scope there in terms of longevity and future-proofing, though today was all about 1440p. And I think we're actually bang on the money in terms of the very best gaming PC for 1440p that you can get right now. But I'd like to know if you guys agree with my choices, so definitely put a comment down below in regards to if you'd maybe change any of the components, or if you think I made the right choices. Obviously, the case, the power supply, the cooler, and the fans are subjective, and other options are available on the market for around the same price. But I wanted to do something, I guess, a bit different, and the Tower 300 certainly did that with its very unique orientation and complete showcase style look. I'm happy with it, and hopefully you guys and girls were happy with the video. We don't typically do many builds on the channel as they don't tend to maybe perform as well as our hardcore CPU or GPU content that we normally do. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you want to see more of these in the future, let us know in the comment section, as well as liking and sharing this video. That really is the best indication for us as to, I guess, what you like and what you want to see in the future from eTeknix and the future of this channel. For now, that's going to about do it for this one. If you like the video, don't forget to subscribe for lots more awesome videos in the future. And if you love what we do, then you can help support everything we do by joining the super special Patreon members club, where you'll get access to a lot of our testing data, exclusive behind the scenes content, bi-weekly game nights, monthly Patreon live streams, and so much more. The link is, as always, down below. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.